The days of posting a job and praying that someone applies is no longer okay. We just can't do that. We can't operate that way.
So what does it really take for your business to attract world-class talent today? I'm Dave Travers, president of ZipRecruiter, and on Talent All-Stars, we shine a light on the people and the day-to-day processes behind recruitment and retention at some of the world's most influential businesses. Today's Talent All-Star is Leeann Kaminsky, Senior Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer at WVU Medicine, West Virginia's largest health system and largest private employer. Since 2016, Leeann has led HR strategy through a period of rapid expansion, guiding the system's growth from 6 hospitals to more than 24. In this conversation, Leeann unpacks the internal education programs WVU has built to move employees directly into critical roles, how they use data and technology to drive decision-making for a workforce of 35,000 people, and why simply raising your hand can set you apart early in your career. Leeann, welcome to Talent All-Stars.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So excited to have you. So WVU, West Virginia Medical, a huge brand in your state and known well beyond. So I want to get to all that comes with that. But first, I want to start with earlier in your journey. When along the way on your path to being a senior executive, did you realize that being a people team leader might be a calling for you?
Well, it took me a little while because I did not start out thinking I was going to be in this field called HR. When I graduated from college, and I'm going to date myself, in 1996, I didn't really know what HR was. And I had a degree in communications, and I worked for a radio station, and I was a promotions coordinator there. And it was probably one of the funnest jobs I've ever had. But again, it was one of those jobs that you can't really live off of. I had to have a second job bartending at the time. And, I got into that because I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I started out in college, actually. I thought I wanted to be an elementary school teacher. When I graduated high school, I said, I'm going to go to college. I'm going to get a degree in education. I'll have my summers off. I thought that was going to be so cool. And then probably around my first semester of my junior year, I started going into the classrooms, and there were all these tiny little kindergarten kids standing on their chairs and all talking out loud at once, not raising their hands. And I just was, whoa, this is way too much for me. I don't ever think I'm going to be able to contain 30 children in their seats. And I just thought, I don't think this is for me. And so I changed my major when I was a junior, and I really picked communications at the time because I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. And, my advisor said, hey, credits you've taken so far, this would be probably a good path for you. You can kind of then figure out what you want to do. But I loved my first job, and I learned a lot there. But I also learned what I didn't want to do or things I didn't want to see. The person that ran the station, he was a great guy, but boy, did he have a temper. And so I saw him lose it a couple times on the sales staff. And I thought to myself, this isn't what it's supposed to be like. I really don't think this is what it's supposed to be like in the work environment. And then I got introduced to a master's program in human resource management. A friend of mine was involved in it and was telling me about it. And I looked into it, and it really intrigued me. And so I actually decided to go back to school and get my master's degree. And that's really what got me on the path of HR. And then I started my career, my first HR job in recruiting. So my first job was a recruiter. I loved it.
What did you love about recruiting? What drew you there?
As a young professional, what I loved was having the opportunity to talk to people about the job. Making the offer for the job was the most exciting part, because I can't tell you how many times people would be like, oh my God, I'm so excited. Yes, they were so excited to come to work for us. And that made me feel good, right? I'm thinking, I'm doing a good thing. I'm hiring someone that's excited, that's engaged, that wants to come to work for us. And it was awesome. And that was late 90s. And so at that time, HR functioned a little bit differently. And folks back then grew more into a generalist role where you did both recruitment and employee relations. And so then I started getting more heavily involved in employee relations. And I also liked that too, because it was solving problems and helping advise leaders on what's the right thing to do. And some of the things that you would hear about that people would do when they would come to work, you would be like, oh my God, did that seriously happen? But, I always looked at it as job security, right? Because, here we are to help guide and advise our leaders on, our policies and our procedures. But as I grew into, more of that generalist role, I started getting pushed more towards kind of being more of a lead in that consultant type role versus doing the recruitment, because it also was very hard to manage your day. You're dealing with an employee issue, but then you also are trying to recruit to fill jobs. Which one's more important? And so when you're the person in that seat trying to decide, okay, do I call to make this offer or do I deal with this issue that this leader is having with an employee? And so I then chose to move on to that more HR consultant type role to deal with the, heavier issues with managers and giving them guidance and advice and being more of a strategic business partner with them versus the recruitment piece, because then that just started to fascinate me a lot more.
You very humbly sort of, glanced over where you were pulled into leadership there. So, but I think lots of people start their careers and they can't wait to be pulled into leadership. Like, do you just wait to be pulled? How does that happen? How did it happen for you? How do you coach other people to have that moment happen for them?
I think I had really good mentors and that gave me a lot of opportunity. And one of the things that I always tried to do, whether I really wanted to or not, I would always raise my hand and volunteer for something, right? Just to get the experience or to get to know somebody a little bit better or to work with a different group of people, just because I wanted to learn more and I wanted to have the opportunity. And I think with the mentors that I had, they really, really would try to guide me, to push me to do that. And they had confidence in me, which gave confidence in myself. And it made me feel comfortable doing that. And to be quite honest, when I had my first actual leadership position, it wasn't because I thought I was ready or I wanted to apply for something. My leader at the time was leaving the organization and taking a position outside of the organization. And she said to me, I recommended for you to take my job to the CEO. And I said, what? You did what? And I said, why did you do that? And she said, well, Leeann, she was like, you know this place inside out. You know how all the systems work. You know who to go to get things done. And I think you're ready. I think you would be a great leader. And, she said, I think you will do a better job than I did. You know how to politically deal with issues. It was a matrix organization. So it's something that she wasn't used to working in. And so she recommended me, for the job. And I said, well, okay. So they put me in the position on an interim basis. And then I went through and interviewed with a ton of people. I'm talking 30 some people.
Whoa.
And at the time I thought, oh my God, if I don't get this job, after all this. But yeah, I was given the opportunity and I was really thankful because I was young. I was a very young leader. I think I was 31 at the time.
So I'm going to take a stab at something as I hear that story and you tell me if you think this is right. You told that story where, you were selected before you had confidence in yourself and that you had great mentors. But I think that was highly connected, I'm guessing, to what you said at the beginning, which is you were a person who raised their hand to volunteer for things and take on a project, even if it wasn't the dream project you've been waiting for. But there was a reason, I would guess, why mentors and why your boss who was moving on to the next thing knew you and had confidence in you, which is you had put yourself in that position and you didn't wait for perfect. You saw an opportunity and you said, I'm going to learn, I'm going to get to know these people better. And as a result, they saw in you maybe before you even saw in yourself what could be.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Absolutely.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. Okay. So now you've risen all the way through the ranks. You're the lead of the whole HR team. You're the chief people officer and you are at the top of a massive organization. So now, as you think about what is required for people who are starting today on that journey, who think, I'm just at the beginning now, but I want to make it all the way to be a chief people officer. How would you advise someone? What advice would you give along the way to somebody who has that interest and that capability and that ambition?
I think the advice I would give them would be similar to my experience, is to ask to be involved. Raise your hand when people are asking for volunteers to do things. Because what I found was I would be in meetings and they might be talking about a new project that's happening and they're looking for volunteers to work on something. And the leader would say, do we have any volunteers? Does anyone want to do this? And you'd look around the room and no one would raise their hand. And so I'd be like, okay, well, I'll do it if nobody else is gonna, why not? Why not take the chance and get that new experience? You're never going to know if you're going to like it or enjoy it or do well if you don't try. And so I think it's about putting yourself out there and making sure that you are giving yourself the opportunities to learn and grow, because that's the only way I think that you're going to progress, is that you have to put your best foot forward so that you can be recognized.
I think being in that role of being that first time when you feel almost your hand raising rather than you choosing to raise it yourself feels really scary. Feels like I'm putting myself out there and I don't know exactly what I'm doing. I'm not sure I want to do this really. And I don't know if I'll succeed. And what if I fail? But give the perspective now of being the leader. When you're in a room at a team meeting or whatever, and someone raises their hand, how does that feel as a leader? Like, how does that shape your impression of the person?
Oh, it makes me feel good that someone is wanting to participate, wanting to give back, wanting to learn. It makes me feel good that they want to be part of that. It shows me that they're engaged in the work. And we often see a lot of the same people that do that, over and over again, because they do. They want to learn and they want to be part of. I have found that people like to have their voice heard, right?
Yeah.
And they like to contribute and they want to be a part of something bigger. And I think that's part of the reason why my team has been able to do the work that we've done over the last 9 years, because we have gone through some significant change. Because when I started out here, we had 6 hospitals and 14,000 employees. And today we have 25 hospitals and over 35,000 employees. And we initially, with the 6 hospitals, when I came on board, I was the first system leader in HR. There was no system HR. It was me. And I had to build a team. I had to create an operating model. And our CEO, who is a really amazing leader, he said to me, we are going to grow and I need you to create a model that's going to be scalable for growth. And it's got to happen fast. And I said, okay, well, how fast are we talking? And he said, like less than 2 years. And I was like, whoa. And, we did it. We created the model, and it's all because of the people that are on the team. I didn't do it myself. I had an idea, and then the rest of the people that we brought on board, they're the ones that really made it happen. And if I didn't have that group of people, we wouldn't be where we're at today. So I really give credit to the team for helping us get there.
I love the beginning of that, where to you, it feels good as when someone raises their hand. And to a young person who's raising their hand for the first time, it's scary and you're thinking about failure. But I think it's really important for young people to hear the word failure did not come up at all for you as a leader when you see someone raise their hand. You're not worried about them failing. You're just feeling good. And so you want to be a hand raiser early in your career. I think that's so valuable and powerful. But then, okay, let's talk about, you pivoted beautifully to the change that you have driven and the expansion you've overseen at West Virginia Medical. Okay, so now, as you are expanding an organization at that scale, there's no playbook. There's no, you can't call upon the last 3 times you expanded to 35,000 people in your career. There's not a hotline to call where it's like, oh, we're the people who expanded to 35,000. How do you approach a project like that when a CEO comes to you and gives you an impossible task, but maybe possible? How do you get started? How do you be the person who's like, okay, I can do this?
Yeah, well, first it was building the team, right? I knew what the operating model looked like because I worked in an organization that was highly integrated. And so I knew what it needed to look like. And so it was just putting those pieces together. We didn't build it exactly like it was from one of my past experiences, but it was putting those pieces together. And what we had to do was then integrate everything. So we had to integrate all of our benefit programs, retirement, all of our policies and procedures, paid time off, holidays, anything that you can think of. Every one of those 6 hospitals, they did it differently. And if you were an employee working at one hospital and you wanted to apply to a job to quote unquote transfer to another hospital, you couldn't do it. We couldn't recognize your service because they had a completely different benefit plan. And there was nothing in those programs that permitted transfer of service. So, we had to create all of that. And so we've now made it so easy for people, number one, to transition and come onto our platform. And then number 2, once they're part of the system, one of the greatest parts of being part of a large system like this is the ability for the support and the resources that you have, not only at the system level, but at all of the different hospitals where your experience may be at this hospital today, but there might be an opportunity at a hospital, 30 miles down the road where you could move into a different higher level position and you can do it so easily and take everything with you and you don't lose anything. And so that's been, I think, a great thing for employees in the organization to have that mobility that they didn't have back in 2016.
Mobility is opportunity, no doubt about that. I love that. Okay, so let's talk about, you're in healthcare and you're in markets where the talent pool isn't always for super highly skilled role. You don't always have a bunch of talent standing by in the local market. How do you even approach for something as important as medicine and operating large medical centers and all the patients that are relying on you? How do you approach developing a strategy to get the people you need when you need 35,000 great people to care for your patients?
First of all, you need great data analytics. We have amazing people that do data analytics on our team in HR, and they track what we call our critical workforce segments. And so there are certain jobs that we know we really need to be following. We need to understand what our needs are now, today, and what they're going to be over the next 10 years. We're looking at the Bureau of Labor Statistics to see how many people are out there available to do this type of work. We're looking at what our needs are going to be based on just attrition, but then also with growth. And so we're really staying close and monitoring those critical workforce segments. And those are things like nurses, respiratory therapists, radiologists, surgical technicians, CRNAs now. That's another big thing. Highly competitive market for all of these jobs, and not enough institutions that are putting people out there, right? So we've done a ton of workforce planning. And as part of that, we've had to create our own programs. So we've created our own nursing diploma program. We've created, in relationship with West Virginia University, a respiratory therapy program. We've created our own internal surgical technician program to train surge techs. We have our own internal radiology programs. So these are things that we are doing to make sure that we are creating pipelines for ourselves, so they're feeders, so that we have qualified individuals to go into these jobs. Some of it's going to take time. For example, like the CRNA program, that's a newer program. It takes 3 years for students to go through it, but we're investing in it because we know we need those people to be here and to stay here to help take care of the patients so that we can do the right thing for our customers and our patients in our service area.
That's so wise, and also gives a view into how long-term your planning is. Because if you're thinking, I'm going to start a respiratory therapist program at West Virginia University, holy cow, like it's going to take a minute before you have some respiratory therapists coming out. So how do you, in the meantime, because you also have operating rooms that have a patient and have a doctor that can provide medical care and need medical care, but it requires a whole bunch of other people to operate an operating room or an MRI machine or whatever that is. In the meantime, as you're solving these long-term problems, what do you do to take care of the urgent while you're doing these long-term important projects?
So it's a highly competitive market, highly, highly competitive. And it's become even more competitive since we've lived through this COVID pandemic. And a lot of it is around doing creative things with sign-on bonuses, or if we have people that work for us that